crystallised a lot of thinking within Rio Tinto has been the fact that we made the commitment around net positive impact back in 2004, and that was, I think, quite a brave thing to do at that time. But what it has done, I think, has allowed us since then to build a lot of the thinking that how would you give substance to that on the ground throughout the company. It's also, I think, started to drive a lot of innovation throughout the company as to how you do it. So I think the fact that we've made that commitment has actually meant that we've had to put in place the building blocks of how to give it real substance on the ground. I look across the group now as when I travel around at some of the actions being taken, and I do see that people are thinking differently about biodiversity around the group. I look at some of the examples that, in Western Australia, where we have had surplus water from our operations, that they're now using that for actual hay cultivation, so that can then be used for cattle that previously were just running around the outback. That sort of action is, I think, sort of reflective of the fact that we're starting to change internal culture in understanding this, the dynamics of what will make sort of us successful in managing biodiversity in a different way. I think that needs to have external settings to be supportive to really scale up. I think some of that comes through the sort of partnerships, the sort of engagement we're having here today. We're talking through these sorts of issues. I think it's very important for us. It's a lot of the key expertise to actually help us along this journey lies in the community here, rather than in depth internally. So that collaborative network is absolutely critical. Regulatory frameworks, again, remain important to have frameworks which are, I think, supportive of the companies doing the sort of work that we're doing to move things forward. Industry associations, again, sort of help us along that journey is very, very important, and for us to articulate the sort of work we're doing. So maybe leave it there.
Let me share two perspectives. One is within the company and one is within the industry, if you like. I think within the company, it starts with making sure that everyone realizes the business case. Because like Peter alluded to, we're in business. So if valuing ecosystems, protecting biodiversity is seen by anyone in the business, in any country, in any area, in any activity as tree hugging, value destruction, then you're not going to get very far, you're not going to get scale. So one of the things that we are very keen on is that from leadership to people in the front line, fully appreciate the sound business case for protecting the environment. That's one thing. The other thing I mentioned already, which is mainstreaming all decisions related to our activities on protecting biodiversity action plans, and appreciation of the ecosystems. What has helped as well is if from certainly within our company, if this also gets integrated into the full activities that we deploy. And I'll give you an example. We've recently launched as part of our research and development, a platform that now evaluates how we can truly reduce water usage across our entire set of activities. So as an oil and gas company, we're deploying our research activities to reduce water use and to make sure we manage the effects of our activities from a water perspective, not only from an oil and gas perspective. So integration, innovation, research development, and making sure everyone in business understands value is, I believe, essential for scale. From an industry perspective, scale of course starts with best practice, sharing, collaboration, setting expectations, measuring, conveying to contractors. And that again often is a difficult challenge because we operate in many countries where either governments present in this room or partners also present in the room possibly may not share the same values. So we may be a minority partner. And we would want to adhere to our values. So it's important that we then take the effort as a company to convey our values and get the buy-in from the partners or the stakeholders to execute the program accordingly. So industry best practice, association, coalitions are all vital in that respect. And then the final element to mention is a willingness, if you like, from the company, which we do, to participate in the regulations associated and needed. Indirect land use change, sustainable biofuels, roundtable palm oil. So all those elements, I think, in order to get scale, you want to set the framework and you want to make sure you create a level playing field and an environment which is conducive to the investments that are needed.
Thanks very much. Jan.
I think to scale up and speed up our practice is to collaboration with government is very important, because in most countries the byproducts, especially the slag, is classified as waste. So it makes it difficult for us to use in a new application. For instance, we are building a blast furnace plant in Indonesia, but Indonesia classified the slag as a hazardous waste. So we have a discussion with the Indonesian government, and we also launched a co-research with Bogor Agriculture University in Indonesia to apply our technology of marine forestation to the coast of Indonesia. In Korean case, we made an MOU with the government, the Ministry for Food, Agriculture, Forestries and Fisheries. So we are going to build 2 more coastal sites using steel slag in this year.
Just before we go forward, one thing that came up there across, I think, all of the panelists was regulation and framework. I mean, so there's soft regulation, industry standards, but then moving forward to government regulation, how important that is as part of the scale-up solution. Okay, so let's move now to Peter and Juan, scale-up.
Thanks, James. The one thing I really see is important is landscape level thinking. We really got to people to start looking at these large landscapes in terms of scaling up. And so, for example, 2 areas that I think we should identify with. The Forest Dialogue has a process underway which is looking at food, fuel, fibre, forests and fresh water. The 5Fs, and I think this is critical that we start getting around with those stakeholders, including local governments where appropriate, and looking at these elements, because this is where it's going to be played out. And then through that process, by putting up lead examples, sharing ideas, and getting government policies to follow. So that's a really important part. The other, of course, is, as I stressed earlier on, is multi-stakeholder processes. And again, Anna mentioned that our success really has been by bringing in government, other companies, and local communities. Not easy to do, but again, a very important part of that. So, personally, what I'm going to be looking at is, in terms of, we've just been looking at the value of ecological networks, and I really see this being so significant for land use that, again, one of the global processes that we've identified is the WWF, NGP as it's called, the New Generation Plantations. We'll use that and start getting the message across through those systems. And we will be working with WWF, hosting that sort of process, looking at sub-Saharan Africa. And I think there's room for really some huge changes to bring in these really good principles of land use practice. Thank you.
Examples to get up to scale. I think the first one, and I want to do 2, an internal one as well, and more the external one, or the outreach one. To get to scale, what you really need to do internally is to actually integrate those measures that we are talking about here into your strategy. I think for too long we have thought that through projects that become programs, we can change the way we really do business. I think that's not the case. Either you understand how it informs your strategy or you will fail. That's my absolute conviction. So last year, based on all the discussions that we've had around what a sustainable production system should look like, we actually announced a new strategy of Syngenta. We call it the Integrated Crop Strategies. We totally reorganized the whole organization to go out there with a crop focus and not the traditional technology focus that all R&D companies in my sector actually have. So it's not about bringing a certain technology out there, but a solution for a certain crop that the farmer wants to grow. These strategies include the technology, of course. Without it, you can't achieve it. That's the lever that you have, but they include the land component that I mentioned earlier and the people component as well. So the farmer that we really want to support with our solutions. And that means that those people working now on the strategies to go out into the markets have to put those measures into their scorecards in order to understand how the solution that they're proposing, how the business model or whatever they're working on is actually going to deliver on all sides of that scorecard. That's something we're working on in the execution of the new strategy. And that's a fundamental to get to scale. The other element in order to get to scale and the dissemination is actually to find new ways to roll out transformative businesses, especially in those parts of the world that have been left behind for too long. And Africa is a great example for that. There's so much activity going on at the moment about trying to improve the agricultural productivity of Africa, because everybody understands this is where we still have natural resources that are not very well used, not very wisely used. There's lots of degradation, and you can turn that degradation around and actually make it a productive way of farming. You can't get in there as a business alone. You have to do it with many others. And what has been announced a couple of months ago, as a matter of fact, in Washington, D.C., at the G8 meeting, where a couple of nations, African nations, but also businesses and development agencies committed to jointly go in there and try to actually transform the way agriculture is done in parts of Africa, is a good example on how to actually get to scale. We ourselves committed to increase our investments in Africa by $1 million or $2 million, I don't remember what the number was. What it really means is actually to increase the workforce, the number of people working for us, by more than 700 people on the ground. So a real investment into getting agronomy out there. And then out of that, developing solutions that are for the locals, the ones that they need. So that's the other element that I think is fundamental. New ways of actually partnering between businesses, government organizations, and NGOs, like those around the G8 commitments and many others that are growing at this point in time, to share the risk of investment.
Thanks, Juan. Dr. Zahate, how does Hitachi think about scale-up?
Okay, well, I think energy will become even more a big subject of global environment, including biodiversity and ecosystems. Therefore, we will continue to make efforts strategically in this area. We human beings give a large influence to the nature and the environmental circumstances through our daily lives. We have to live with nature, but the improvement of living standard is a strong desire of humans. The continuing population growth will create a resource and energy-intensive society. On the other hand, many people accept the fact that natural resource of the earth is limited. So, before the fossil fuel is running out, we have to find a new energy source. And the business sector will try to contribute to this issue through the development and deployment of technologies related to energy, together with other sectors, including academia.
Okay, thanks very much. So, couple of things I picked up on that is how important it is to scale up internally. You know, making this a core business function, not an add-on, a nice thing to do. It's absolutely core, fundamental to what companies are doing. And then perhaps another angle is innovation. You know, I guess you can innovate internally, but also innovate in terms of rollout and outreach. Okay, so I just have a couple of questions for the panelists before we open it up. And the first one really relates to the issue of cross-sector learning. You know, and the question I had was for the first four panelists. Net positive impact is something that Rio Tinto is well known for. The idea of having a positive impact and using the mitigation hierarchy in a very effective way. How relevant is that perhaps to the aggregate sector, oil and gas sector, steel sector? And Sheila? Perhaps not just net positive impact, but that concept.
You know, we do get asked that question every once in a while. And in terms of what does it mean for us, this whole issue of biodiversity management is a fairly new initiative for us. We only started working on this 5 years ago, so our maturity is not quite there like it is with Rio Tinto, for example, and others. And for us, what we want to do is just really get the processes in place and get the management of biodiversity and the rehabilitation of our quarries well understood and well in hand and embedded into the business. And then we can look at how do we measure it. And then once we have the systems to measure it, once we know what our baseline is, what sort of commitment can we make as a company? So maybe we took the opposite approach of Rio Tinto, where they use this as a way to drive change within the company. We're looking at it from the point of view is, okay, let's understand this and let's see what we can take away from it from a measurement point of view. Let's see what our baseline is and what are the appropriate commitments for us to make. The other point I'd like to make is this idea of following the mitigation hierarchy. So how do you measure net positive impact? How do you measure no net loss? Is something that we will need to learn. But by following the mitigation hierarchy, we can already do so much to protect biodiversity, to avoid the sensitive areas, and without getting to that last bit, which is the offsets.
Thank you, Sheila. Alad, IPECA, some of these other strong sector associations your sector has, how would NPI sit with them or that type of concept?
Not easy to answer, but let me start reflecting on how we look at it and then perhaps expand that to the rest of the IPECA organization. IPECA is the International Petroleum Industry and Environmental Conservation Association. I didn't think of the name by then. To a large extent, Shell also follows the mitigation hierarchy. In our control framework, in our expectations, in our measures, in our targets, we expect biodiversity action plans. And as a matter of fact, we are collaborating with Rio Tinto, with IUCN and the Nature Conservancy to address some of the concerns still related to NPI. So as a company, we are certainly open and positive, but we also want to make sure that NPI, if embraced, is fully accepted by also the NGO community, who are a large and important stakeholder in this perspective. And I'm aware, and I know, as you know, that not everyone in the NGO community may have a similar appreciation for the element of NPI related to offsets. So the mitigation hierarchy, fully on board, incorporated in our thinking, incorporated in our control framework. I think it's fair to say that some oil companies would be receptive, and as far as we're concerned, there's no use in being the only one out there. As I mentioned earlier, you're as good as the worst operator, so if we embrace NPI, it would also be under the hypothesis that we would be able to extend our influence to create a larger coalition, because I truly believe that scale will come from those larger coalitions. It will not come from only one entity embracing a good idea.
In the steel sector, how do you think net positive impact would sit with the steel manufacturers? So the question of net positive impact, the Rio Tinto model. So when you manage your operations, you try and avoid, minimise and restore, and then go a little bit further. Do you think this is a concept that's relevant for the steel sector? It's okay to say no.
Sorry, it's difficult for me to say about that. Yeah.
Right, let's look at the two competing land use sectors, forestry and, I'm from forestry, so forestry and agriculture. Cross-industry learning between forestry and agriculture, how do you feel about that? And let's start with one first. What can we learn together as land use stewards and managers?
I think there's a lot, but even the inspirational language of net positive impact is something that we essentially have taken up in the land management sector ourselves. We probably don't call it net positive impact, at least. I think the better way of doing it is based on the analysis, what is the footprint that a certain sector actually has. And for us in an input sector is actually to translate this net positive impact into something that we call more with less. So it's actually decoupling productivity on the farm from